All right, welcome everyone to our series of conversations on biopolitics and democracy. And through these conversations, we aim to explore the political tensions that we experience in these times of pandemic. And our intention is to raise awareness to the biopolitical stakes of the ways in which states and society face the current global health crisis, and to understand the transformations that the pandemic has brought upon our form of life. And we will also like to propose a collective and critical exercise of political imagination for possible futures after the pandemic. And today we are delighted to have Camila Vergara with us. Camila is a critical legal theorist, a historian, and a journalist from Chile, writing on the relation between inequality, corruption, and domination, and how to institutionally empower common people to resist oppression from the powerful few. She holds a PhD in political theory with specialization in constitutional law from Columbia University, and she's currently a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Cambridge, conducting research on plebeian constitutional rights. She's the author, among others, of a terrific book that came out last year for Princeton University Press, Systemic Corruption, Constitutional Ideas for an Anti-Oligarchic Republic. Thanks so much, Camila, for being here with us. Welcome, and we would like to start this conversation by asking you to tell us perhaps a bit more about your research that kind of gravitates around this notion of plebeian politics, and perhaps telling us a bit more about this notion and maybe highlight how you think it can be helpful also to understand the kind of current political moment and the current implications of the pandemic on society.
Thank you, Daniele and Federico, for inviting me to the program, to this project, which I think is essential. And thank you for this question and asking about the new projects. Yes, so what I have tried to see the crisis of democracy and our political system and how things work, not from a democratic theory perspective, in which basically the people are all in, we're all inside the same community and there's no differences, but from a plebeian perspective, from the perspective that takes into account the socio-ontological division between the few and the many, understanding that because of our way of organizing, at least how it has been in history, there has always been a few that are powerful and that dominate and that rule for the good or the worse, and the rest. And therefore, the understanding of plebeian politics and philosophy is to understand society divided between the few and the many. Moreover, this division is also coupled with the understanding of the world from the plebeian perspective, from a material perspective. And here, not only about a materialist in the sense of Marxist thought, in which inequality and wealth inequality and the domination coming from the capitalist system of exploitation is taken into account, but also from the lived experiences of the plebeian classes, and not from abstract principles in which, you know, everybody's equal. So plebeian politics is a very interesting lens because it goes very well with the last trends of the separation between the 99% and the 1%, and what we have become to understand as the oligarchic problem that we have, the 1% problem, the super rich problem, and the exploitation of the earth and the climate collapse that is coming with it. So I go back to this lens in order to kind of retrieve a wisdom that we have lost after the modern revolutions and the declaration of equality for everyone in a way, at least gradually, but in the sense that it was legal equality. So coming from that perspective, I think it is very interesting to see the pandemic, the consequences of the pandemic, and how can we understand the pandemic better from this lens. Because if we remember, before the pandemic hit, we had the idea that the people were divided, the society was divided and there was an underclass. We knew that, everybody knew that there was exploitation in our systems. However, the moment the pandemic hit, this veil of liberalism, this veil of equality, of formal equality, began to be pierced and then basically torn by the stark inequality that immediately happened after, in the sense that we started having, at least referring to the working classes as quote unquote essential workers. And we were forcing them to go to work, even if they could basically be killed in the process. And we were calling them essential and saying that they were heroes, but actually they were the underclass and the precarious classes. And in that moment, we understood that the pandemic revealed this divide that has been covered up by the ideology of liberalism, in which we are all equal because we're just human, right? And of course, this is an aspirational concept, the idea that we are all equal. Sure, morally we should, but in reality we have never been. And therefore we need to start understanding that the state treats us very differently depending on where we are in that position, if we are of the few or of the many. So while the many are the essential workers and need to come to work to clean my house and deliver my food, while I am safe, we can see that the policies that are coming from government in order to keep us safe at the end criminalize the majorities, criminalize the workers, force them to sacrifice their lives and sacrifice for the good of everyone, supposedly. And this is something that needs to be questioned. And also, I think it is a valuable lens to see the solutions to this problem, because we cannot just find solutions to the precariousness and this division and domination that is permanent, basically, in a permanent feature of our systems, but also on how to resolve it and how to address it, not just in the margins by giving some subsidies here and there. We actually need to change the relations of power in order to have the plebeian classes, the majority, those who do not rule, those who are the common people, having at least having a floor on which to stand, and for our oligarchs to have a ceiling in order not to go too far, in order not to become oppressive, and to have a critical questioning of our laws and rules that are not because they are made by elected representatives. It means that they represent everyone, or they serve everyone in the same manner.
Thanks, Camila. That's very interesting. And I think that it points to the second question we have for you. Because during the pandemic, we've seen, in addition to this whole differential treatment of people and who is essential, who's not, we've also seen a series of securitarian procedures that were mobilized throughout society to address the public health crisis. So the question would be, do you think that these measures had an impact on democratic life, and how? But also, I'd just like to add a critical note to that, because I can see that from where you're coming from, let's say from a plebeian perspective, maybe we could not even speak of democracy as a concept here in its full meaning. So I was just wondering if you could engage with that question.
Yes, it's very interesting how the response of the state have basically deepened the trends that we saw before, this oligarchization of power, the criminalization of poverty, with, for example, in the US, with laws against loitering or just hanging around, that were basically created to catch the former slaves and put them in jail and then put them to work in favor, of the companies subsidize, the cheap labor. All these things that we just came to live with, laws that we believe are equal to everyone, actually they are have a disproportionate bad impact on the majorities. So we see the securitarian rules that came out from some of the states. The responses were different. So we see, for example, in France or in Chile, which countries that have a very illiberal, in a way of dealing with dissent, I would say, and that have like a strong fascist tradition, very nationalist in this manner, and very law and order tradition, that immediately the state began passing laws and policies that were criminalizing individuals. Here, the idea that if you don't get a sanitary pass, you cannot do anything, right? You cannot go anywhere, and the police are given more arbitrary power in order to see if you have the pass and check you. So therefore, of course, if you are upper class, you're never going to be stopped by any cop. This is, you can ask, I think it's an educated guess that the majority of people who come from money have never been harassed by police. And this is not the case with ordinary people. So with these measures that we're going to criminalize individual behavior, for example, in Chile, you needed to wear a mask outside, even when walking the dog, even though science told you that basically there's no contagion. And if you were not wearing a mask, instead of the state giving you a mask in order to protect you, they would catch you, bring you to the station, put you in, jail with other people without masks, and they'll charge you insane amounts of fines, And all these people were working class; they were not, high class. So this is how you further criminalize poverty. Then, if you wanted to go out, the same as in France, as in Chile, you needed, and Italy too, you needed to have, a special permit to go out of your house. So the essential right to mobility was basically crushed, and you needed to ask for it through the internet. So if you only had a good connection to the internet, and then you had a printer or something, or a phone, then you can actually go out. But if you are from the lower 3% of the population who do not have internet, who do not have a printer, who do not have a smartphone, then you need to go to the local police station in order to ask for a path, in order to walk your dog, or go to the supermarket, or to the doctor's appointment. And that is something that goes and burdens the individual without providing the infrastructure for you to not be dominated and for you to be safe from the virus. Okay. And also how at least it was very telling how things worked in a more neoliberal society like Chile, in which the policy went in order to preserve employment, quote unquote. And therefore, only essential workers were given special passes to go to work. Okay, so what happened is that the virus traveled with, the working classes, and not from the working class neighborhoods to the upper class neighborhoods, but the other way around, because the upper class were, traveling throughout the world and bringing the virus with them. And then, all the service personnel were coming and giving special passes to work on those households, and then come with the virus in their communities. And this is what happened in many parts of the world. In the US, very libertarian. The state cannot really do that. It's not a tradition. And therefore, it has been worked in other ways, in terms of you just have to fend for yourself. And we have promotions of very in favor of coming back to normal. They were cleaning up the streets, quote unquote, of homeless people, because the rich people in Manhattan wanted to go back to normal and go back to their restaurants and back to their very comfortable life. So the state got rid of the problem by criminalizing it again in another fashion.
Thank you so much. It's so crucial, I think, to our project to be able to reflect on this kind of issues. And perhaps just a follow-up question here: what is the difference that you see between your perspective, the kind of plebeian politics, and this kind of very complex notion or phenomenon of populism in the past few years? Like, what do you think that the pandemic is going to have an impact on the ways in which populist parties around the world will kind of emerge from that with different strategies? Or is there are there positive aspects in a certain way in the pandemic and in the experience of the pandemic from the point of view of the lower classes to actually give them more, I don't know, tools or ideas of how to resist, or how to organize, we're also kind of trying to find some optimistic kind of views about what is happening. Do you see in your experience, either in the US, in the UK, in Chile, kind of positive aspects of that?
Yes, I see positive aspects. And actually, I want to go back to Federico's question because I didn't answer it really, which is the impact of democracy and our understanding of democracy. Because as Federico was saying, I have in my book, Systemic Corruption, I basically address this and say that today, representative governments are not really democracies. And this is not something really new. Also, Hélène Landemore in her new book, Open Democracy, says exactly the same thing, that electing people and authorizing them is just selecting an elite. It's an elected oligarchy. And this is nothing new in terms of how the different methods that the elites have used to self-select in a way, or use the people to select them instead of themselves. But that doesn't mean that we are in a democracy, really. However, we live with this narrative of democracy in which everybody's equal, and have equal rights and can participate. And basically the law is legitimate because we make it through our proxies, who are, the representatives that basically have a free mandate and they can do whatever they want. So it doesn't really make sense, but they have sold this to us as a very hegemonic narrative to legitimize the current state of affairs. And I think the pandemic and all these measures have deepened the understanding, or at least have revealed for many that democracy is not what we think it is. That these rules of the game are created by these elite representatives who do not suffer really the law that they make. We see that the systems benefit disproportionately the powerful few. All of the system, the rule of law doesn't rule us all in the same manner. However, we want to believe that. But with the pandemic and all these individual measures that came to criminalize poverty instead of, elite rule, and disproportionately give the benefits, the social product of society to the few, we see that representative governments are not really democracies in the sense that there's no people power involved, and that we who suffer the law cannot make the law and cannot veto the law. And here, the plebeian lens is very interesting because in the project that I'm developing, I am trying to bring back the idea of rights of the common people as different from the rights of all. And here, back to the Roman Republic and ancient Greece, in which the rights were never private. The rights were always political, in the sense that always was political power attached to the rights of the common people. And for example, the tribunician function, the tribunate, the first power and most important power was the power of intercessio, the veto power. The idea that the elites would see the plebeian people as a different group that need recognition, and that if they violated that pact of peace between the elite and the people, then they will have a divine vengeance coming against them. It's a sacrilege, basically, to go against the tribunates. We don't have that today. Supposedly, the courts are the ones who are defending us in an individual basis and are the tribunician power. However, is very weak and is only individual. There's no collective power. So we need to go back and not only question democracy as we have understood it, but also how the socioeconomic power plays into the game of politics. So we need to question not only that the state was built to preserve private property very explicitly in the liberal canon, but also that we have understood rights themselves as a form of property. And this is a problem, because today with climate collapse, we cannot understand that we the people are the owners of nature and we can exploit them for our own benefit, right? To bring ourselves socioeconomic rights and material benefits. We need to understand ourselves as part of an ecosystem, not owners of nature, but basically using, but in balance with it. So I think this is ties with the idea of, a more progressive understanding of populist politics, of the polities from below, that today with technology is something that is connecting everyone, in the sense that we have seen throughout history that plebeian power is always localized, and therefore has been very difficult to scale it up to the national level, from the local to the national, and then to the regional and global, has been very, very difficult. But today with the pandemic, and thanks to the pandemic, we have seen that through Zoom, through StreamYard, and Jitsi, and all these other platforms that are free, and everybody uses Instagram and Facebook, even though they're part of their private networks. Still, people are connecting and people are organized on the ground. So I think for the future, what I see, and I would see, at least see in my crystal ball of positive thinking for the future, is that the people can really organize at the local level, connect in a network with platforms that allow for that connection, and then scale it up to the global world, in a way that we, in order to tackle climate change and to force the representative governments of each of the countries that are dealing with it, that we have the struggles within each country, we can really connect people in a network and push from there, and basically control representative governments and the oligarchs that are destroying the earth for their own benefit. And here I would like to kind of think of plebeian politics coming from a very biopolitical, in a good way, in a way of understanding how politics is connected to material conditions and life. In Chile, due to the pandemic, a very old practice of mutual aid came back, the ollas comunes, the common pots. Basically in the neighborhoods, women mostly, they gather together, they bring their resources, and they create a huge pot of food, and they basically feed the neighborhood for free. And it's just a practice. So I think those, and there are thousands of them. Okay, thousands of common pots throughout Chile now. There are 900 encampments with different committees, with housing, projects of solidarity. So I think those people are already organized. Now they need to connect in order to push and be in solidarity and have more power in the numbers. I think technology gives us that, and we had the technology before, but the pandemic forced us to be outside of our community because we couldn't meet in presence. So at least in Chile, that allowed for the local councils, assemblies, all kinds of organizations to connect and reach out. So I think this is a positive note. And I think this is also a change for populist politics. Populism understood as a form of plebeian politics and not ethno-nationalist politics, that is fascism, and we should name it as such. Right-wing populism, in the fashion that people are saying, it's not correct as a concept, because it just muddles our understanding of that phenomena, and therefore is not suitable, and it should be discarded. But populism as a form of politics from below, it has a long date and is still kicking. And I think one of the problems of it is that always have been very authoritarian, because the system itself is authoritarian. The representative system needs a leader or a party to be a kind of a ventriloquist and kind of a talk through and say that they're the people. However, today with technology, people organize at the local level, can speak, can act, can decide, can deliberate by themselves and for themselves. And I think this could be an opening for a new form of politics from below.
That's very illuminating and very informative. And I couldn't agree more with your reading of democracy. And I always ask myself, how come that elective mechanisms and oligarchic mechanisms have become synonymous with democracy when we have a rich history of democratic traditions that imply direct participation and collective power? So I couldn't agree more, and I think it's a very interesting approach. The last question, maybe, I think you touched upon it already when you mentioned this current forms of organizing that are emerging, even in the context of the pandemic. But in this project, we have the idea of proposing an exercise of imagination regarding life and politics after the pandemic, and perhaps linked to this last answer you gave, how can we imagine maybe a plebeian politics for after the pandemic? How would forms of political action take? Which forms would they take after the pandemic?
Yeah, I like that question because it's so imaginative and future-oriented. Thank you for that. So in the book, in Systemic Corruption, in the last chapter, I put forward this understanding that we have organized ourselves as a human species in a very animal manner, in the sense that animals have a central a neurological system, a brain, and that commands the extremities. And the extremities, you know, feel things and goes back to the brain, but nothing goes on if the brain doesn't allow it to. There's no, you know, decentralization, and that we need to organize not in that manner, because we have done that again with the Caesarist politics and the party politics. It's always one central command, and everybody needs to obey and mobilize for the leader or the party. We need to organize in a way, the same way as plants organize, or at least, or there are not they organize, but they are beings that are constructed in a horizontal manner, in the sense that they are neurons or decision-making parts of the plants, in roots, in the branches, in the leaves, and there's no central command of the tree. So therefore, all of the tree, works for the survival of the plant, right? But in a very autonomous and very constructive manner. They signal each other, so the roots can kind of turn around and go back to where the water is, right? And also, very interestingly, is that there is an intra-species and within species, but also interspecies relation of vegetables and plants in general, in which they connect through the mycelium of the fungi. This is something that I learned after writing the book, but basically that there is a network, okay, through which the different plants of they're very different in structure, they connect, and they work in solidarity. If there is a pest coming, there are chemical signals that are passed through the grid, and basically all of the plants they can shield themselves from it in advance. So this is something that we need to understand, that today the people is not one people. There are multiple peoples in a way. There are multiple nations that have been subordinate. In Chile, we have now the theme of plurinationalism, not to just really recognize indigenous peoples, but recognize them in equality, as equal partners inside a state, and therefore how we're going to relate. So therefore, we need a mycelium in a way to connect these different expressions of the people. And I think the network, this idea of the people in network, is something that we need to try to promote in a way. And I think this is the future of plebeian politics after the pandemic.
Great. Thank you so much for these thoughts and this conversation. It gives us a lot of things to hope for also in the future and to work for, right? The idea of our project is definitely also to kind of push people to, you know, to get to work and to do something with what is happening, and not just, you know, kind of accepting what is happening in a more passive way. So Camila, thanks so much for being with us today, and thanks everyone for watching the video. Thanks Federico for doing this together, and you can check on our website the other videos and the other conversations that we have with other scholars. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.